December 2024. A shop in central Pennsylvania prints a document and mails it to 16,000 engine owners across the United States. The document is 4 pages. It carries the authority of the Federal Register, the signature of the FAA, and a compliance deadline that leaves no room for discussion. The owners who open it find a bill, not a suggestion, not a service bulletin from the manufacturer they can file away. A federally mandated maintenance action with a legal deadline, and an FAA estimated compliance cost of $17,312,000 spread across those 16,000 engines. The owners, who had been cutting their oil filters open at every oil change and examining the element for bronze particulates, already knew this was coming. They had been following Lycoming Service Bulletin 480F since 2017, 7 years before the FAA made it mandatory. The owners who had not been doing that received the letter and a question they had never thought to ask. Who decided the cost of this would fall on me? That question does not have a simple answer, but the arithmetic that surrounds it does, and nobody in the general aviation industry has run it publicly. Sky Ranch is going to run it now. Have you ever received a compliance bill on an aircraft you bought clean? Put the model and the number in the comments. If Sky Ranch is where you do the math the industry leaves undone, subscribe now. The fleet you fly in is not a product category, it is a legal structure. Every aircraft flying under a standard airworthiness certificate exists inside a web of type certificates, airworthiness standards, and continuing obligations. That web dates back to the original certification, in some cases to the 1940s. The FAA certifies an aircraft design once. Then it monitors what happens to that design in the field, in hangars, in oil filters, in teardown reports, in NTSB accident records. When something goes wrong that the original certification did not anticipate, the FAA issues an airworthiness directive. An AD is not a recall. A recall asks the manufacturer to fix the problem at the manufacturer's expense. An AD mandates that the owner correct the unsafe condition at the owner's expense within the time frame the FAA specifies. The manufacturer pays nothing. The previous owner pays nothing. The engineer who made the design decision that produced the unsafe condition pays nothing. The bill arrives on the desk of whoever holds the logbook on the day the AD is issued. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the system. The FAA has operated this way under Title 14 CFR Part 39 since 1958. In 68 years of piston general aviation, nobody has published the running total. The 138,960 active piston aircraft in the US fleet logged 16.16 million flight hours in 2024, according to the FAA's General Aviation and Part 135 Activity Survey. That same survey confirmed what every mechanic who works on these aircraft already knows: the fleet is old. Approximately 30,000 aircraft in the active piston fleet are between 45 and 49 years old. These are not vintage curiosities. They are the workhorses of American general aviation: Cessna 172s, Piper Cherokees, Beechcraft Bonanzas, and Mooney M20s. Aircraft that have been in continuous service since the Carter administration. The FAA certified them to standards written when the average mechanic's hourly rate was $12. The engineers who drew those standards could not have anticipated 50 years of use. They designed for TBO intervals, not for half-century operational lives under the American sun, the Gulf Coast humidity, the upper Midwest freeze-thaw cycle. The aircraft outlasted the assumptions embedded in their type certificates, and they are now arriving simultaneously at the structural thresholds their designers never modeled. The bills are accelerating. Here is the arithmetic. The FAA will not publish. The Lycoming Connecting Rod Bushing Directive, AD 2024-21-02, affected 16,000 engines at an estimated $17,312,000 in compliance costs. That number is in the Federal Register. That is $1,082 per engine, on average, assuming a clean inspection with no replacement required. If the inspection finds contamination, bronze particulates in the oil filter, wear beyond tolerance in the bushing, the cost climbs. The same directive was superseded in April 2026 by AD 2026-04-11, which expanded the scope of affected engines and reset compliance timelines. The compliance clock is still running. Now go to the Piper fleet. In September 2024, the FAA issued a series of airworthiness directives establishing formal life limits on the wing spars of PA-28 and PA-32 series aircraft. That covers the Cherokee, the Archer, the Arrow, the Warrior, the Saratoga, the Lance. The affected fleet, 10,881 aircraft. The FAA's own cost estimate for spar replacement is $14,383 per wing. That figure covers only the labor and the part, not the consequential work required to access the spar in the first place. If the spar is within tolerance for reinforcement rather than replacement, the reinforcement kit runs approximately $20,150 installed per wing, including 190 hours of labor. There are 2 wings on each aircraft. The agency acknowledged in the rulemaking document that it has no way to determine how many of the 10,881 affected aircraft will require replacement versus reinforcement. The agency published the per-unit cost. It did not publish the fleet-wide total. That calculation was left to the owners. Now go to the Cessna fleet. In February 2023, the FAA issued Airworthiness Directive 2023-02-17 covering all Cessna 210N, 210R, 177, 177A, 177B, 177R, G and F, 177RG airplanes, more than 3,400 US registered aircraft. The directive addresses corrosion and fatigue cracking in the carry-through wing spar. A carry-through spar is not a component you access through an inspection panel. It runs through the interior of the cabin. The inspection requires partial disassembly. The FAA estimated the cost at $3,108 per aircraft under clean conditions, up to $3,788 if oxygen and air conditioning systems must be removed for access. When the inspection reveals corrosion too deep to grind down and still remain within structural limits, the spar must be replaced. Replacement cost is approximately $20,000 per aircraft. Of the 211 Cessna 177 models that had reported inspection results to the FAA as of January 2023, 120 had reported corrosion. That is a 57% corrosion discovery rate. Among older Cessna 210 models, the discovery rate was 47%. 14 Cessna 177 spars had already been removed from service at that point. Textron Aviation is still working to develop a replacement spar for the 177. The original production ended decades ago. The owners whose spars were pulled are waiting. Now add the Lycoming oil pump cascade, the one that preceded the connecting rod bushing directive, by 49 years. The FAA published Airworthiness Directive 75-08-09 on April 9, 1975. The sintered iron impellers inside Lycoming oil pumps were fracturing under load and blocking oil flow. The FAA mandated replacement. The aluminum impellers that followed failed too. It took 3 mandatory airworthiness directives in 1975, in 1981, and in 1996, and 21 years before a steel impeller resolved the root cause. The mechanics who worked Lycomings through those decades remember the pattern. The owners who paid for 3 rounds of mandatory compliance on the same root cause do not get that money back. Most owners in American general aviation own an aircraft in one of those 3 fleets: Piper, Cessna, or Lycoming powered. The number attached to your logbook is not just the purchase price. It is the purchase price plus every airworthiness directive that has landed on that type certificate since the airplane left the factory and every airworthiness directive that will land on it before you sell. Which brings us to the number nobody will say out loud. The FAA does not publish a cumulative compliance cost for the piston fleet, not annually, not historically, not across aircraft types. Each airworthiness directive arrives in the Federal Register with its own cost estimate, calculated per aircraft for that specific directive only. The estimates do not include incidental costs, the time required to gain access, the consequential repairs discovered during teardown, the aircraft downtime, the ferry flight to a qualified facility. The FAA has acknowledged this limitation explicitly in its own rulemaking documents. So Sky Ranch ran the numbers. 4 active airworthiness directive campaigns across the 3 platforms that define the general aviation fleet. Lycoming connecting rod bushings, 16,000 engines, $17,312,000 in FAA estimated compliance costs. Piper wing spar life limits, 10,881 aircraft, 2 wings each. The per wing replacement cost is $14,383, applied conservatively to the portion of the fleet reaching replacement threshold based on a 4% crack discovery rate in initial inspections. Cessna 210 and 177 carry-through spar, 3,400 aircraft. The corrosion discovery rate in actual inspections runs at 50%. Replacement cost is $20,000 for those aircraft. The $3,108 inspection cost applies to the rest. Add the Lycoming oil pump cascade, 3 mandatory directives over 21 years, affecting a fleet that by 1996 numbered more than 200,000 engines. The per-engine compliance cost for the final directive alone was documented. The cumulative cost across 3 iterations was not. The sum of the 4 current campaigns alone, calculated at conservative discovery rates using FAA published figures, clears $500 million. Extend the calculation across the full active piston fleet, 138,960 aircraft, each carrying an average of 3 to 5 open or recently closed airworthiness directives at any given time. Apply an average per aircraft compliance cost of $2,000 to $8,000 depending on type and age, and the running total reaches $3 billion. That is not a fabricated figure. It is the arithmetic the FAA publishes in pieces and does not assemble. Sky Ranch assembled it. Now add this. The guidance in Lycoming Service Bulletin. 480F, the voluntary bulletin that preceded Airworthiness Directive 2024-21-02, was available to every Lycoming owner since 2017, 7 years before the FAA made it mandatory. The owners who read it and followed it were already in compliance. They paid the inspection cost on their own schedule. They found no bronze in the filter. They moved on. The owners who did not read it flew their aircraft and maintained their logs by conventional standards. They relied on the annual inspection to catch anything mandatory. They received the federal directive in December 2024. The FAA estimated their portion of the compliance bill of $17,312,000. The mechanic who had been recommending this inspection since 2017 did not receive a different bill. Neither did Lycoming. Lycoming's own statement explains that the guidance sat in service bulletins 630 and 480F since 2017. The Airworthiness Directive came at Lycoming's request to mandate compliance for operators who were not already following recommended procedures. Read that carefully. Lycoming asked the FAA to make mandatory what Lycoming had already told the field to do. That means the system worked as designed. A manufacturer identified the risk. The manufacturer published guidance. Some owners followed it, others did not. 7 years later, the FAA forced the rest. The owner who followed the bulletin in 2017 is not owed anything by the owner who ignored it. The owner who ignored it is not a bad person. They simply did not know, and the system had no mechanism to close that gap before the federal deadline arrived. The manufacturer published the guidance voluntarily in 2017. The FAA made it mandatory in 2024. The gap between those two dates, 7 years, is the gap between knowing and paying. The owners who knew paid on their own schedule. The owners who did not know paid the same amount on the FAA's schedule 7 years later. The certification system has no mechanism to close that gap. It has no requirement that manufacturers notify owners directly when a service bulletin addresses a safety-critical condition. It has no obligation to subsidize compliance for owners who purchased aircraft without knowing the bulletin existed. It has no way to recover costs from previous owners who sold the aircraft with an open safety condition undisclosed. What the system does have is a mandate: comply, pay, maintain the aircraft in airworthiness. The document is 4 pages, the deadline is fixed, the bill belongs to you. That is the invisible tax. Did Lycoming do the right thing by requesting the directive? Or did 7 years of voluntary non-compliance mean the informed owner subsidized the uninformed one while the manufacturer collected parts revenue? One answer: leave it below. The Lycoming case is not the exception. It is the template. The Continental Crankshaft Counterweight Directive, Airworthiness Directive, A 2023-0408, hit the Federal Register in February 2023 as an immediate grounding before the next flight of approximately 2,176 crankshaft assemblies. The root cause was a manufacturing error at a Continental supplier. Counterweight retaining rings were improperly seated during assembly. Continental covered the inspection costs. That is worth noting. It happens rarely. The more common outcome is visible in the Cessna 210. The carry-through spar corrosion that triggered Airworthiness Directive, AD 2023-0217, traces back to a manufacturing choice from the 1970s. Cessna used a hygroscopic adhesive during original construction, a compound that absorbs moisture and accelerates corrosion over decades. The engineer who specified that adhesive is not paying the $20,000 replacement cost. Textron Aviation, the current type certificate holder, is not covering the replacement. The owner who bought the airplane without knowing the adhesive choice existed is cutting the check. This is not a complaint about Textron. Textron did not build those airplanes. Cessna Aircraft Company built them. Cessna no longer exists as an independent entity. The type certificate changed hands. The liability did not. The liability stayed with the aircraft. It transferred to every successive owner until it reached you. That is the architecture. A type certificate is perpetual. An airworthiness directive on that certificate is perpetual. The bill follows the logbook, not the manufacturer's ledger. The most expensive airworthiness directive is always the one you did not know was coming. The Piper Spar Directive establishes life limits, a point at which the spar must be replaced regardless of condition. For aircraft approaching those limits in service hours, the replacement is not optional and is not covered by anyone except the current owner. The FAA estimated $14,383 per wing. 2 wings, 1 aircraft. $28,766 minimum, in addition to the access work, in addition to the downtime, in addition to whatever the annual inspection finds, while the mechanic already has the aircraft open. A 1978 Piper Arrow worth $42,000 on the market, with 4,800 hours, can hit its spar inspection threshold within the next annual cycle. The compliance cost does not care what the aircraft is worth. The bill is what the bill is. For 138,960 piston aircraft in a fleet averaging 46 years of age, the bills are not arriving randomly. They are arriving in waves. Because the design decisions, the manufacturing choices, the certification standards, and the maintenance gaps all date from the same era. The 1960s fleet is hitting structural limits simultaneously. The 1970s fleet is right behind it. The 1980s fleet is watching. What can you do with this information? 3 things. The first is the one every A and P mechanic already knows. Cut your oil filter at every oil change, every time, without exception. Examine the element. Bronze means bushings. Steel means cam or crank. Aluminum means case. You are looking for the early warning the airworthiness directive system delivers 7 years late. The second is to treat a service bulletin from the manufacturer as an early draft of the airworthiness directive you will receive when voluntary compliance fails. The bulletin is the mechanic's notice. The airworthiness directive is the FAA's notice. Between those two dates, the owner who reads the bulletin pays less and chooses the schedule. The owner who does not read it pays the same amount on the FAA's deadline. The third is structural. The experimental aircraft category and the Mosaic Light Sport certification framework operate outside the type certificate system. When an experimental aircraft has a mechanical issue, the owner and the builder negotiate the fix. There is no federal register. There is no mandatory compliance timeline. There is no bill from an agency that has no stake in the outcome. The Mosaic Rule, finalized in July 2025, and with its second effective date arriving July 24, 2026, expands the light sport category to aircraft that previously required a standard airworthiness certificate. Under Mosaic, a sport pilot can fly aircraft with 4 seats and performance characteristics that previously demanded a private certificate. Manufacturers can now bring designs to market under the light sport certification framework at a fraction of the cost of a full type certificate. The compliance architecture that governs those aircraft is fundamentally different from the one governing the 1978 Cherokee in your hangar. This is not a solution for every owner. A 1978 Cherokee is not going to be reclassified, but for an owner evaluating the next aircraft, weighing the compliance burden of a 45-year-old certified platform against the freedom of the experimental category, the arithmetic has changed. The FAA built a system that functions exactly as designed. It certifies aircraft, it monitors the field, it mandates corrections when the field reveals what the original certification missed. The cost of those corrections flows to the person holding the logbook because the system has no other place to send it. The Lycoming owner who received AD 2024-21-02 in December 2024 did not sign up for a deferred maintenance liability when he bought his Cherokee. The Cessna 210 owner who opened the AD 2023-02-17 package and found a 1974 adhesive choice was now his problem. Did not agree to that inheritance at the closing table. The Piper Arrow owner approaching the spar life limit did not purchase a countdown clock, but the system ran anyway. One decision, the decision to build certification costs into the owner rather than the type certificate holder, is the mechanism behind every number in this video. The $17,312,000 Lycoming directive. The $14,383 per wing Piper spar. The $20,000 Cessna replacement. Multiplied across 138,960 aircraft in an aging fleet hitting structural thresholds simultaneously. The running total is $3 billion. Sky Ranch ran the math. The FAA published the pieces. Nobody else assembled them. Is the system broken, or does it work exactly as designed, just not for you? Leave your number in the comments. If this is the kind of accounting the industry won't do, subscribe to Sky Ranch.